This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guests only. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is for informational purposes only. And because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. Welcome to Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces, a podcast devoted to changing the way eating disorders and mental illness are viewed in our society. With your hosts, Jack and Linda Mazur and Ellen Bennett. Today's guest is Jillian Rigert. Jillian has formal training in dentistry, medicine, and oral medicine. She is currently a postdoctoral research fellow in radiation oncology at a cancer institution, as well as being a life and leadership coach with primary focus on life and career transitions. Jillian is a quality of life, mental health, and eating disorder awareness advocate and YouTube enthusiast, where she shares life lessons from many who are seeking deeper meaning, purpose, and connection. Jillian's coaching website is jillianrigertcoaching.com, and it includes a link to Permission to Pivot and her Facebook group. The links for today's podcast with Dr. Jillian Rigert and our hosts are in the show notes.
Rigert everyone, to Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces, episode 118, Burnout, Permission to Pivot, with Dr. Jillian Rigert. Dr. Rigert will be joining us in just a moment, but first I'd like to welcome my co-hosts, my roommate, my husband, my soulmate, Jack.
And also her driver, wherever, that's what I tell when we go somewhere. I'm just her driver.
Driving Miss Linda. Not always my driver.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today.
And I'd also like to wish a warm welcome to our friend and fellow advocate, Ellen Bennett, our color person.
Hello. So good to be back and so great to be part of this trio talking about things that really, really matter. And also, I get to meet people who I may not have known. So great to be here.
So first, I'd like to begin with a quote before we welcome our very special guest. This quote is by Paulo Coelho, author of one of my favorite books, The Alchemist. Stress, anxiety, and depression are caused when we are living to please others.
Ain't that the truth?
I don't think we can argue with that one.
No, we learn way too late that's the case. Yeah.
And now I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our very energetic, bright, compassionate guest who is making a huge difference in many people's lives in so many different ways. Welcome, Jillian, Dr. Jillian Rigert.
We are so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I love that quote. I think it's very much in line with my messages, and I really appreciate all of the things that you are doing to spread awareness and advocacy.
Well, you're going to put us to shame by the end of this podcast, but we're very in awe of you. So take a deep breath, and we're going to bombard you with a few questions, okay?
I'm ready.
Ready?
I'm all ready. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so why don't we begin with you telling us and our listeners about your background growing up? Did your early experiences influence your path going forward in deciding to commission into the Air Force and embark on a career in medicine and dentistry?
Yep. And as I think about that question, I think absolutely everything in terms of my childhood and my interests as a child. I was the child that played doctor all the time, very much interested in science, and was very athletic. So I saw the military. I would watch videos and TV series on the Marines. And I thought, wow, those people are very physically fit and can protect themselves. And I was known as a child to say, I do myself. So I always wanted to do everything myself. And I appreciated the ability to push myself in multiple capacities. So the interest in the sciences and medicine and the military seemed very much obvious if I had to look back on my childhood experiences.
Did you have relatives in the military previous?
I did. My grandpa was in what was the Army? It was the Army Air Force.
Army Air Force, pick.
Yeah, but it wasn't such that we talked about it growing up. I think we talked, so I had my family was very much into powerlifting And my dad brought me to the gym. And so my time with my dad, he owned restaurants, so I didn't get a lot of time with my dad because the hours for people that are in restaurants are very off scheduled for family life. You know, every time that you want to spend time with your family, they're often having to be at the restaurants, including holidays. Yeah. So I really enjoyed and find now that my sacred space would be the gym, and feeling like I felt very proud that my dad was proud of my weightlifting. So when I think about that, I think the desire to be in the Marines was more of that element rather than really understanding what the military had to offer.
Okay. So you were in the military and you had some medical concerns in 2017 and you were discharged from the military. You had a medical discharge from the military, which had to be devastating to you. You were under a lot of pressure as an oral surgery resident and a medical student. So can you tell us about those things, how it felt for you at the time, and reflecting back, how you feel about it now?
Yeah, it's very painful to reflect back on. I got out of the military and I appealed to stay in, so it's something that I did not choose myself. I really valued the opportunity to be part of the Air Force. And my experience going through oral surgery was something that, you know, it was before that we had heard a lot about burnout. It was before I heard the term imposter syndrome, and before I heard people discussing the exact experiences that I was facing at that time. So a lot of the things that I felt that I was struggling with, I thought I was alone on. I thought I was the weak link. And to reflect on it now, I give myself a lot of self-compassion for the self-compassion I didn't give myself at that time. And why I speak out about it now, because I never want anyone to feel like they are the one that's broken, they are the one that's alone. And it's very hard for me to sit and actually feel all of the feelings I was experiencing at the time, and to really sit through the grief of losing my military career and losing the identities as an oral surgeon and everything that experience meant for me, because I lost my ex-boyfriend at the time. Close friends of mine died while I was in that time period. Of course, we met through talking about my anorexia story. So I had to feel the pain of what I was experiencing through that and what that meant at the time. Experienced the pain of the loneliness I felt through being misunderstood with anorexia at the time. It's a very loaded experience in my life. And it has provided me a lot of the platform and purpose for my current living and my current advocacy. So with that mixed stage of grief, it is that mixed feeling of purpose and meaning that I have now in my healing journey, and to help make sure that my healing journey creates a purpose of the pain.
Did the military offer any counseling to you after you left?
The military, the VA has been great with mental health. However, there are gaps within the military for eating disorder treatment. So my experience in the military when I was active duty was I had good support with the one-on-one therapists. And when I first got help for anorexia, it was very challenging, because a lot of it was, you're always concerned that you're not going to be adequately supported and that your job in the military is going to be at risk. And you would hope that you would want to prioritize your life over your career, and that in reality shouldn't really be the question at the time. It should be, how can we optimize this person's health in order for them to live, in order for them to be successful at their career? However, I was having that internal struggle of not feeling adequately supported to fully embrace the need to get help without it risking my career. So when I did get help in the military, an issue I had mentioned to you all separately was that the place that I was sent to was not a good treatment center for eating disorders, and they could not adequately take care of me. And it was through my chance. I flew myself from North Carolina to a different state for this treatment center. And when I got there, they said they couldn't keep me because my heart rate was too low. And it just highlights an issue we have with eating disorder treatment centers across the nation, across the world. And I am extremely frustrated not only is it hard to access these programs because they're financially very expensive, their efficacy is very low from my experience. I can't speak for everyone. I can't speak for every place that people can go to. I can speak for every experience that I've had. And there are certainly deficits. And I think the deficits go as deep as misunderstanding what an eating disorder is. I think people actually create it to be something much more complex. And maybe the pathophysiology is complex. However, if we equate it to an addiction or something that people can understand better, I think people will be less avoidant of helping people with eating disorders. So that's a main goal I have for now, is to help people understand what's the role of anorexia in a person's life. So then we can help to really target coping skills that might replace that eating disorder, rather than just say that's too complex. I'm going to refer to somebody that really wants to try to understand eating disorders. I think we're doing a lot of not-its and a lot of referring, and there's a lot of patients lost in that system.
Well, you got through it, and God bless you. And it's very hard for a lot of people to share, but I applaud you for doing that, because I don't think there's anything more inspirational to somebody who's struggling than somebody who has come out the other side and done so well.
Absolutely. People like you, Jillian, really inspire us, even though our journey was very different, to hear your journey. And I just thank you so much for sharing and really talking about this, because as a professional, you're going to have a profound impact. Keep going. As I had the opportunity to read some of your blogs on Kevin MD, and I love them, I encourage anybody to take the time to read them. And what stuck out to me was your experiences led you to some incredible insight into eating disorders. On one of your posts entitled Military and Medicine, 10 Shared Risk Factors for Eating Disorder Development. First of all, that comparison is incredible. It was very eye-opening for me, and I think being shared with many, it will really help. And I love your statement. We need some major overhauls. Yeah, Thank you very much. To the point and direct, we need overhauls. We're kind of past tweaking. We really need to look at this differently. Will you share more about the 10 shared risks? They are very telling. I suggest, again, check out Kevin, MD.
And I love Dr. Kevin Poe, so I absolutely suggest anyone support him, his platform, and all the great voices that are being shared, and consider sharing your voice on that platform. Absolutely. For the article with the 10 shared risk factors, that was ignited because it's very clear to me what the commonalities were. And when I think about the misconceptions with eating disorders and the people that are being silenced, especially as I was navigating anorexia in the military and in medicine, I had the opportunity to observe what is the misconceptions, what's the unknowns, and the importance of talking about it, because there are so many people that have reached out to me that are in medicine, all different aspects of medicine, and also in the military that feel they can't speak. So these shared risk factors are they're not isolated to medicine and to the military. I was in dentistry, and it could be applied to dentistry, and it could be applied to a lot of different specialties. However, I chose medicine and the military because, the pain that I'm healing through right now is during that time period where I was observing the commonalities between the two. Mm-hmm. And the risk factors I shared were about the predisposition, which is often people that are type A perfectionistic. And then you have these people with type A perfectionistic tendencies which often are associated with increased risk for eating disorder development. And I think there's like a lot of emotional anxiety about getting things wrong and needing to control in order to get things perfectly. And in order to control or numb the emotion of feeling unworthy because you're not perfect, that's where the eating disorder role came in for me. It's when I didn't feel perfect, I didn't feel worthy. And when I didn't feel worthy, I didn't feel worthy of food, or I was so upset with myself that I would just, use eating disorder behaviors or exercise behaviors in order to deal with the emotional pain. And then we have, speaking of emotional pain, we have a limited ability to express our emotions. In medicine, you're given limited time. You're supposed to save face. You often can tell a patient a very challenging prognosis and sit with their emotional pain and then have to move on quickly without processing. In the military, or you think about, you want to not look like an emotional, you want to look sturdy. You want to look like you can get through anything. So to look weak, quote unquote, because you're feeling and expressing emotions, and our society makes the emotional expression equate with weakness, then when you're not able to express emotion outward, for me, that means you're taking that emotion inward, and then your overwhelming emotions can turn into you needing to cope. And that's where, again, eating disorder behaviors come in. Same with moral injury or trauma. It's a very similar emotional, just needing emotional release or numbing from those experiences. Then we have weight biases. This is interesting because the weight biases, something came up for me where I went to the doctor recently for concerns of cardiac failure. I had symptoms of cardiac failure. And I'm very nervous because that's always been the thing that people tell me it's going to be my highest risk for death from anorexia aside from suicide. So not to trigger people, but it's a reality of the condition. And so I live with slight anxiety about cardiac failure. So when I was feeling symptomatic, I called the doctor, which was a positive sign for me, because it was a positive sign for me that I was advocating for myself because I cared about my life, which was a change in how I had previously been when I was becoming apathetic. So I was celebrating that this was a sign that I was starting to heal. I call the doctor, and immediately I tell her the weight gain that I've had over the past year, which was also a good thing because I was not in a physical good state last year with anorexia. And I tell her, I know I'm concerned. I'm having these symptoms. I have bradycardia. It got pretty severe last year. And immediately she is flabbergasted by this weight gain and hyper focuses on it and starts asking me about my thyroid and my exercise. And then in her note, writes something about counseling me on the move, quote unquote. Thankfully, it's this like program she didn't counsel me on, or I must have tuned it out because I can tune out my triggers at this point just for my own self-preservation. But it's the next Kevin MD article I have in queue to submit to him because I was flabbergasted. I'm like, she knows my history. She knows I'm pretty darn good at weight loss. She knows that I don't need any counseling with exercise if she had listened. And I was very overt in my approach to communicating my concerns with her as a self-protecting mechanism. Yes, I have gained, this amount of weight, and that's a very positive thing. And I voiced it to her in a way to avoid what I was fearing the most, which was what she said, was this hyper focus on the weight gain. And I'm like, you literally just made the fire the weight gain. You want to extinguish the weight gain when I called in for concerns of cardiac failure with a history of anorexia or nervosa. Can we imagine how we translate this to every single patient that comes in and how often this is happening and why people avoid the doctor and how we have extracted the human from our healthcare system, which, we're talking about permission to pivot. And I think that extracting the human from our healthcare system goes beyond the patient. It's, the provider, the physician is also in a system that has devalued us as a human. And then if you're not feeling like a human, how do you see the human? So the weight biases are really causing a challenge, which are sending the messages that weight is like a super, very important thing that needs to be modified at all costs. And in the military, it's often people will go to extravagant lengths to meet their weight requirements to stay in. And in medicine, weight, it always, it comes up often. And I wasn't upset with my physician. I was infuriated by the system because her counseling to me is just a reflection of very long systemic beliefs that need to be challenged and have a complete overhaul. Mm-hmm. So that was 4. The rest 5 was the decreased autonomy. So we think, we need control, sense of control. If we have less autonomy, then the eating disorder behaviors may come up for an illusion of autonomy or illusion of control, which it's an illusion because the eating disorder then takes over and we get out of control. So it gives like a false illusion of control. And to me, I can still say, oh, when I want control and feeling out of control, it's very much shows up as, that's the role of anorexia to make me feel like I'm in control again. And I know where that leads. And then in medicine, in the military, we do a lot of transitions, which is very similar to the need for control. If you're constantly changing and moving, and this can apply to anyone that's in a workplace that's constantly changing or their life is just not stable, then needing a sense of control can ignite eating disorders. That pressure to be perfect that I mentioned, it just really drives a lot of anxiety and inability to feel if your worth is validated by being perfect and you're not ever able to be perfect, that's emotionally unsettling. And for me, that meant I never felt worthy of eating because I could never be perfect. And I never felt worthy of life and food. And so food is, sustains life. And it provided for me, like when I think of that now, I lose my appetite and I get emotionally, like it's emotionally very challenging. If I allow myself to sit in that expectation that I need to be perfect, releasing myself from the need to be perfect and being goofier than heck and just really learning to embrace the growth journey has honestly been one of the most miraculously healing mindset changes that I can offer to anyone. Because it's the performance anxiety and everything that I reflected on that I was really creating more suffering for myself was being driven from that pressure to be perfect. And how much fun is it to be around people that can release that? Yeah. It's like, man, that's awesome. It's so freeing.
Yeah, I've seen some of your reels, you and Reese. You're having fun. Yeah.
Yes. The reels were funny because they're certainly part of my humor side. And you always get nervous is what will my employer think? So something funny came up. I was teaching my coaching I was presenting my coaching to the coaches of my healthcare system. And there was a leader there. And one of the physicians brought up my reels as like something funny to show our human side. And I had to give disclaimers. Like, before you check those out, just please know, here's the expectation, because you're like, oh, just because I'm embracing it doesn't mean I have some concerns. And I always try to think if the president of our hospital looked at those, would he be okay with that? Hopefully so. Yeah. But then we go down to the list. We're talking about comorbid mental health conditions. So we're talking about using eating disorders as a coping skill, or they show up to help navigate depression, anxiety, OCD, trauma responses. And then the other things are the misconceptions with eating disorders. Like I said, people, I think, make them more complex than they need to be. And I over-intellectualize them to try to understand why I have an eating disorder, because it's very abstract to me. Like I can tell you everything about the eating disorder. But then I realized we don't need to know exactly where it stems from and exactly the pathophysiology behind why somebody acquires or is more at risk for one, to start to understand how we can improve their quality of life and reduce their symptoms. Great. And improve their relationship with self, food, and exercise. So the misconceptions, again, is just I try to translate it to something that people conceptualize a little bit more. And I think that's why I gravitate towards the addiction type of model, or at least it's a coping skill to deal with something deeper. Mm-hmm. Yeah. When we think of body image and things like that, for me, I think anorexia is so dissociated from my body. Like, yes, I have body dysmorphia, but it's more like anorexia is a coping skill to deal with profound anxiety. And then when I developed depression, it was just a secondary impact of not wanting, the severity of my depression. So I wasn't thinking about my body size or like needing to look a certain way at that time. And interestingly enough, I think that's where like people are starting to create more diagnoses and terminologies for eating disorders, which I think does a disservice. I'm like, I don't think we have to start changing diagnoses. Like once I developed anorexia, just because I might be at a different weight or I might not be hyper focused on my body type, like just labeling all these things, I find it to be not helpful, because anorexia became such an identity for me that once people start to stratify eating disorders into different terminologies, then society really creates this stratifying type of, this eating disorder is better than the other. So for example, like if we have diet culture that's driving our perception on what's valued, and somebody has anorexia, well, we're doing the exact things that's championed by society. Versus if someone has binge eating disorder, then they might be doing, their behaviors may not be as accepted. They're both suffering from eating disorder. Like that to me is flabbergasting that we're going to champion one when both are hack. And
it all stems from the same things. Same things. It just manifests in a different way in different people.
Yeah. And it's so disheartening, especially as I've dealt with very similar. I mean, they're both mental health, right? I've lived in a body that it might not be obvious that I'm struggling with anorexia, especially right after I come out of treatment. And that spirals me right back down when I cared what society had to say about it. But I think that's the healing, right? It's like you teach, like the Kevin MD articles I have came out of the frustrations I had from those misconceptions. It was part of my voice to create healing. And a lot of that is the people that are listening, like, use your voice, because when we don't use our voice, when we have to prove ourselves, I see this a lot in the before and after pictures, and where it's come for me when I stepped out to be more of an advocate for anorexia. It's like, you want to validate your struggle through like, oh, this was me before and this is me after. Like that does a disservice, because this me after in a body that may not look like I'm struggling with an eating disorder, my mind is wreaking havoc on me, because now I can feel. And when I can feel, like the eating disorder is so much harder for me to manage versus when I was numb. Like I said, when I went to get help from the physician for concerns of my heart, like that was a positive sign I was wanting to live. Right. So I think all of those misconceptions really need to be broken down, and we need to do a lot of unlearning and relearning.
I know we've got to move forward, but was the doctor a cardiologist or just a PCP?
No, she's a PCP.
Okay.
And I take it your heart was okay?
I don't know yet, actually, but yeah, I don't know. I got my cardiac workup, but that's a good point of like just advocate for yourself.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to have you on another time just to talk the whole time about your articulation, in regard to your eating disorder. I think it's amazing, and I think it will help so many people because it's so hard to articulate. So right now, I just want to say that I get the impression that your healing and learning and growing are things you are paying forward after experiencing the most challenging time of your life. That requires honesty and vulnerability. The culture applauds those who do things well, who do them at whatever cost, and keep smiling and not show vulnerability or weakness. But some people are beginning to speak up. So tell us about your latest endeavors, your YouTube channel, Permission to Pivot, and Jillian Rigert Life and Professional Leadership Coaching, because you are working with all kinds of people with all different issues, and you are making a huge difference.
And I have to ask, do you ever sleep? I look at all the things you're doing.
That's something that I really need to try to learn to prioritize, because interestingly enough, sleep deprivation was the main factor that drove me to my mental health decline, and that's something I still struggle with. But I have a lot of anxiety about, the things that have happened with the heart. Like I do notice that sleep is something that I will admit I don't do very well. But what I think, for the YouTube channel and the Permission to Pivot, they go hand in hand. So on the YouTube channel, I invite people. We really are talking about life, and I value authenticity. We're talking about people valuing saving face and trying to pretend like things are okay. But then when we see the struggling, and like I mentioned, when I thought I was alone in my struggle, the amount of increased suffering that brought to me was so tremendous. It was life-threatening. And so I value often, I've always, as a kid, you know, I spoke freely, and it was just, I get frustrated with, I was known as Silly Jilly, and I just wanted people to be honest. And I really valued honesty, and Air Force, the first core value is integrity first. So my values are integrity and authenticity and connection, which are what I highlight in the YouTube channel. When I bring people on, it's really to learn who they are, their life lessons, and to spread what they're doing and spread their voice of what they're doing today, so that the people that need more of them in their life can find them, and also the mutual support that those individuals get from sharing their voice on the channel is very important to me. I often think that when we embrace our true selves, then we get put into situations such as Facebook groups. Like my Facebook group came because I couldn't find a Facebook group that allowed you to share without concern that you were going to get your post taken down because it was quote unquote self-promotion. And it really bothered me. So, you know, I'm like, well, then where do people find you, and how do you celebrate who you are and leaning into what you're doing? So Permission to Pivot was created off that, and allowing people to really just talk about what they were interested in doing, even if it was a non-traditional path, in a safe space with supportive people. And then my coaching is the same. It's life and leadership coaching. And I'm along the same lines. I'm in Martha Beck's Wayfinder Life Coach Training, and I did professional leadership through my institution. And Martha Beck has The Way of Integrity, which is a great book. It's all about living within your integrity and kind of physical and mental manifestations and spiritual manifestations of living out of your integrity and trying to be someone that you're not. So I'm trying to help support people and provide them space to explore what it would mean to live within their integrity.
I'm going to have to get that book.
Martha Beck is great. I've read some of her other books, and I think she's pretty incredible. And her coaching training is one of the most highly regarded anywhere. So it's great.
It's been the biggest part of my healing journey, which I love to spread that to others. And
well, that spiritual component of healing is just as essential, if not more so, than all the other pieces. And when you talk about perfectionistic people, I gravitate towards real people because I can't even go there when somebody, you know, people just present this perfect everything. I just can't even compete. So I just am so much more comfortable with people who are honest. You know, just honest about who they are. And sometimes it's hard to find people, but I have a village now. I have a great village. So.
Well, yeah, society and marketing, that's all you see in these commercials. They're like this perfect life, this perfect house, this perfect car, the perfect kids, the perfect clothing. Everything's, you know, like so idealistic. It's like, yeah, and people that can't attain that, then they feel like they're not worthy. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's very interesting too, because once you meet people, like when you truly get to know people, we're all struggling with a lot of the same things, the imposter syndromes, that feeling to be perfect. And I was off Instagram for a long time because I equated it with people and just images and eating disorders and whatnot. And then I was like, well, what if I can be part of people just being goofy on there? And then I realized there's actually a lot of people being very authentic on Instagram. And it's actually created a space in my heart where I enjoy it. But I have had a lot of people that thought my life was perfect. And I was like, it's very interesting to me, especially now people think I'm very highly productive. I must be doing really well. I'm like, actually, like I am a workaholic to reduce the stresses that I have from working. So that's actually a coping skill to me. So when you ask why, like, wow, this person's really productive. Well, productivity in itself isn't that valuable. Are they doing something productive that's meaningful and authentic to who they are? Or are they productive because they're avoiding the pain of being a human? Like we need to just ask yourself why they're doing the things they are. Are they trying to appear perfect because they're insecure and they don't want people to know? Because, you know, God forbid society figures out that we're human.
Yeah.
I always say that you're allowed to be human, right? Yeah. We're allowed to be human. We're supposed to be human.
Yeah.
But, you know, corporations and they want robots. They want you to be robotic. Yeah. So,
Yeah. So when I apply, I make sure they know I prioritize my dog and have a goofy reel. And then I realize that the place that's the appropriate place for me to work is the place that laughs at that. And just make me think that I have to change in order to fit the system because I don't fit the system. And that's okay. Then I'll look, I actually love where I work right now because they have honored every aspect of who I am. And you find that. And you just have to value yourself enough to know that you can find that.
Well, burnout has become quite evident in the news with COVID. But as you know, burnout has been going on for a long time. I know in my profession of pharmacy, I've been doing this since 1976, and it just became so stressful in the last probably 20 years of it. I'm glad I'm toward the end of it. I'm working part-time at a nice independent pharmacy. It's a throwback in time, and it's great. But when I went to school, it was probably, I would have to say, in the 70s, it was almost 90% men and 10% women. And now that's really flipped. There's so many women, and they're not taking it. They just aren't taking this being whipped to death every day and stuff. So they have started conversations and are fostering changes in pharmacy that have needed to happen for years, and I applaud them for that. As a male, you're the primary breadwinner, and so you go to work and you just...
Well, you're not always the primary breadwinner, but yes.
A lot of times, right?
Right.
I mean, so, we just did it. We didn't like it, but we just did it. And I applaud these women that are coming out and saying, stop. You're not going to push me through that wall. We can't do this. It's not healthy for us. It's not safe for the patients. So what % of your clients work in the medical field?
All of my clients work in the medical field right now. It's not necessarily intentional because I do appreciate that burnout is across spectrums. Many people are struggling with burnout. Dentistry is actually one component that I don't feel like we hear a lot about it, except for when I tune into them. But I do feel that people will gravitate towards shared stories, and I have more to offer people that I might have walked a similar path towards. And then, of course, it's where they find you, like Kevin MD or podcasts related to that that I might be on. It's usually through the medical. And like I said, I certainly want to make sure everyone knows their life is valued, because my number one thing is to make sure we know that I'm not more valuable because I went through dental school or medical school. I learned through going through those that the labels weren't going to give me the value that I was seeking, that value is within. And I think that as I navigate the future of my coaching career, I hope to help explore how I can help people through all walks of life, no matter what career they're in.
Well, bless you for that.
Excuse me. It became clear to you that burnout, pressure to stay the course, stress, whatever was going on was also stopping others from giving themselves the opportunity to pursue options, or as you say, which I love, permission to pivot. That it's so huge, because so often people don't give themselves that permission, and it should be readily accessible. Because as we all know, when we're starting out, we don't know the roadmap. Like, things happen. And now you're coaching others. In another blog, I love these blogs, I'm amazed how the brain will think when not okay. And that's power. To me, that's so powerful, because we need to realize that there are times when we're not okay. I can reflect on times in my own life when I knew I'm not okay. Not okay. Some cultures, professions do not allow us to stop or acknowledge that something is not right. I am so glad you're raising your voice to help others on so many levels. We must have these conversations to help all of us. Will you speak to self-care for you and others?
Jack just called me out on my inability to sleep.
Well, no, I was just all the things I see you doing. It wasn't.
No, I'm kidding. No, Jack, it was an important part of what I wanted to say is honestly stepping out of, I didn't want to make him upset, but it was such a key component to, I think, a very important question.
Absolutely.
Because I wanted to champion you for asking me that question.
Because I was probably going to chastise him for it.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
No, it was a very important question because when I was not sleeping, I did not think there were any other options. When I wasn't sleeping and was under the pressure to be perfect and was under the pressure not to change course and my commitment to stay in what I had decided to do, which was be an oral surgeon, and I was concerned about what it would look like and what it would feel like to pivot. The permission to pivot came from my psychologist at the time. I did not have that option in my brain as a realistic option that I was thinking I would pursue. I also know now on days that I do not get sleep, I have to struggle through that day with very dark thoughts. But now that I'm hyper aware that sleep deprivation contributes to those dark thoughts, I can manage that. And I can say, you know what, I need to prioritize my sleep. And what's getting in the way of that right now? Well, this is the overwork. Well, what's the overwork showing me? The overwork is showing me that I am stressed in other aspects of my life. Okay, well then how can I reduce and acknowledge that other aspects of my life? I'm using overwork as an escape. So I went May and I worked a lot in May, and I noticed I was overcompensating with my levels of stress by creating more stress outside of my work. So instead I used that learning opportunity to explore how I can change in June. And I've created more space for myself to really lean back. And I think that the shared experience between stepping out in residency and what June will look like for me is giving yourself that permission to pause. And actually, I recently had a counseling appointment with a counselor here at my institution. And he said permission to put yourself first. And I had to sit with the discomfort of that, realizing that, I'm on a healing journey. I have not yet provided myself permission to put myself first, which is a very shared experience of many of us. And I had a conversation with one of my Wayfinder colleagues last night with the same thing. We're like, how do we put ourselves first without feeling selfish, without feeling guilty? And then he equated the experience to what the airline, when you're on the flight and you learn to put your oxygen mask on first. And I'm like, you're right. Like everything, the counselor who told me was to create a list of 7 priorities and see where my priorities are now compared to where they need to be in the future. And I realized, if I had to put myself on there, I was putting myself 7th. But then when I put myself 7th and I looked how all the other priorities can be done without me, I was like, oh, that's very illuminating. None of those things could be prioritized without me being the priority. Or if they do, I was experiencing, as I sat there looking at the list, I was experiencing another burnout. And I'm like, oh, I'm just experiencing what's going to happen if I don't change. And that burnout discomfort is just so nauseating and exhausting. So I think it's all about that. It's tiny steps in awareness. And when you're in the thick of very high stress or, you're feeling burnout, I think the next best step is to find the opportunity to rest and find peace, because that's when the mind really can explore. Otherwise, that survival mode can really cause such a grayness and inability to see your options.
Very well put.
Yeah, extremely well. Yeah.
I think that so many people can be driven and not be able to sleep and all those things for so many reasons. It can be just being type A. It can be depression. And there can be so many causes for that. But to really understand it and to feel better, you have to be still. You have to find a way just to be still and connect and kind of listen to whatever you believe in, higher power, God, whatever your spiritual belief is, and just kind of let that sink in. Because when your head is going all the time, all those thoughts, all those fears, all those things to do, not much else can get in.
I know so many pharmacists in the last few years, after coming off a 8 or 12-hour shift, and they couldn't go back the next day. I mean, they just, they knew when they left that night that they weren't going to be able to go back the next day. They called in sick, and they were sick. I mean, they literally, the stress of it was just making them sick. And so.
Well, Jillian, this has been a great conversation. And we first met Jillian, Dr. Mira Bihari. She's a wonderful pediatrician. Had a Zoom with all kinds of people on there for different reasons. And we told a little bit about our story, and this lovely, compassionate physician that we're talking to here sent us little hearts and connected with us afterwards. And truly is such a compassionate soul. And it's no coincidence that you are a healer and that you are working with patients who are very sick, going through very challenging times. And if you can find a physician and physicians and dentists that are compassionate, that is such a bonus. It really is, to know that people really care and get it on some level and are doing everything they can for you. It's so healing, and it raises the healing. It raises the bar all the way to the top. So thank you for everything you do, and continued good luck. We'll have you back again, and we'll also stay in touch. You're a very special Emilee connection. Are there any things that we didn't ask you about that we should have?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate it. I was just thinking for the stillness. One of my friends, her name is Dr. Nisa Kiyashin. She is on my YouTube channel, and she has a practicing stillness book, which I really love. It's a good resource for help people to be very intentional about practicing stillness. Okay. It gives little exercises. And then, of course, joining that community, and the things that have been so helpful is knowing that you are valuable, and that whatever you need right now is something to explore. And when you're feeling resistance, to really lean into what's the resistance. And that's something, we could create multiple different episodes on all these different topics. But I just want them to know that there's a supportive community that can support them on their journey and help them navigate their next steps. And they certainly don't have to do it alone. So I'd love, for them to join us on the YouTube community, Permission to Pivot. They feel that might be a good supportive community for them. And of course, reach out to all of us for any questions that we can answer together.
And all the links for today's show are in the show notes.
Well, we'll definitely have you back again next season to talk more about, you developing anorexia and the stigma of having this psychiatric illness and your road to recovery, which I'm so glad that you are on the road to recovery. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for taking time to join us today out of your busy schedule. Again, we are so blessed to have met you on that Zoom meeting that time.
So. You zoomed right into our hearts.
Yeah.
This has been just fantastic. We're just honored I am particularly to get to know you a little bit better. And these are the conversations that need to happen everywhere. Thank you for sharing your incredible journey. And I truly have to say, you inspire us and give us hope and help us believe that everything has meaning and purpose. And thank you.
Well, thank you so much to all of you, because honestly, if I were to voice this and not to have support, it would have recreated the pain. So when you find people with shared missions and values, and you have that community to process together, that's everything. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and joining the mission. And you've also zoomed right into my heart. So thank you.
And Reese was quiet. You said Reese would be interrupting, but he was very quiet.
He could have his own show, right?
How old is Reese?
He's 4. He just turned 4 in April. Okay. And you will hear his collar jiggle jangle through a little bit of the earlier stages of our conversation together.
Well, this has been great. Thank you again, Jillian, and thank you, listeners. You're the best. Please help us get the word out about Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces, because everyone's mental health matters. Tell your friends, share this podcast, and rate and review this on the podcast platform you're listening to us on. The audio of this podcast is now available on YouTube channel, and we are also on iHeart now too. So thank you for supporting Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces. Thank you for listening. I hope it's helping, and just knowing you're out there is helping us.
And of course, we couldn't do this without thanking Rockbox Recording and Production and our wonderful sound engineer and producer, Scott Fitzgerald, the extraordinary Scott Fitzgerald, for expertly producing our podcast and so much more, so much being a friend. This is the place to record your podcast, record your audiobook, or do a legacy cast for your loved ones. Thank you, everyone, for listening.